My name is Richard Leadbeater. We'll introduce ourselves in one more minute. So as the professor used to say, if this is in the class, you have time to audit later. Welcome. We typically have not been able to get this one session at the beginning of the week, and it's always historically been at the end of the week, so hopefully this works out better. One of the things I had hoped to provide, but I didn't, was kind of an overview of the rest of the schedule. So we're going to make ourselves available at the end. If you have your conference schedule and you have questions on what else I should need to know, where should I go? I'm interested in this topic, what kind of user groups are meeting along those lines. I'm more than happy to help you. That's a tough place to get oriented in what some people call a fire hose of information this week. So welcome. Thanks for coming. Chris just passed out a survey. Please, at the end, put the title of the session and what you feel about the sessions. We need the feedback. If you liked some examples, let us know. If you didn't like some examples, that's what we need to know so we can make this class a little bit better each time. We're going to do, as I said, a little bit of what is. How does it work? We're going to go very broad and real thin. So we will be able to cover a lot of breadth, some concepts, some higher level concepts, but we're really not going to get into the nitty gritty of the difference between server and desktop and this and cloud. We're just going to give you a bunch of examples. And with that.
So I'm Christopher Thomas. I'll be tag teaming this. So we're going to go back and forth and move really fast and give you a ton of information that hopefully you can suck up some of it. This is my 26th conference in a row. And so I have experience. So in Redlands, California, which is where we're housed, Richard's actually in Maryland, I head up the government marketing activities for Esri. And like a lot of you in the room, I started off as a person who was designated the computer person in the department and whose sole job was to try to figure out how to convince people to use technology. And through a series of connections, and some of you might be use technology, when I first started, we were actually trying to convince the secretaries whether or not they should use a computer for word processing. It was that difficult. So a lot of this session and things that we'll cover in here is really about getting the organization ready and preparing yourself. And we'll go through this a little bit later. You know, I've always advised you, I got my Twitter handle on there. People always ask me why I don't have a picture of my face. Well, it's pretty obvious, right? But it's really just, I actually was Twittering, people were really mean, so I'd counter back, and I realized they could see me, so I took my picture off. But, you know, we've been doing this a long time, and I just was curious, how many of you are in commercial, or one? How many of you are in education? How many are in defense? Government? Oh, good, my favorite topic. We're going to have something for everybody, and we'll cover that. Go ahead, Richard. Mm-hmm.
Richard Leadbeater. I live in Maryland. I telecommute to California every day. I work on Chris's team in government. My main focus is state, provincial governments, that tier of government agencies and actions. I also cover the government trade associations, so the Conference of Mayors, the League of Cities, county councils, state legislators, governors. And I speak to those associations to remind them that their policy discussions are geographic problems. So I'm often having to interpret the latest in case studies and applications that you do up to that level of executive, trying to find the words that are going to connect with them and remind them that government, that business is a geographic problem, and to take that approach and find a new way. I came from a consulting engineering practice, trying to teach GIS to engineers. Ooh, boy, that's exciting. Spent 7 years in a water utility, another engineering environment, and then came to Esri and have gravitated toward government.
So we're going to start this off. And again, this is supposed to be kind of light and kind of just to kind of get you going. How many of you sat in that audience yesterday with 14,000, 15,000 people and went, am I the only one not getting this? So guess what? I was much like that. And that's why we started this program, is that sometimes we go really excited about getting on the technology and showing you all the exciting things, and we forget to take a step back a little bit and say, why is this important? So I hate it when other people read off the screen, but I'm going to do this with you. So what's the definition of a GIS? It's an organized collection of computer hardware, software, geographic data, and personnel designed to effectively capture, store, manipulate, analyze, and display all forms of geographic reference information. This is in every single textbook you'll ever pick up, and I have absolutely no idea to this day what it means. And the problem with it is what does GIS mean to you? And as you go around the organization, you need to set up a foundation of explaining to other people what GIS is. Otherwise, you have no buy-in. And I've learned this early in my career when I was labeled the computer guy, which meant I was the only one in the department that had a computer, and people would come in from everything. If I want to buy a computer, what should I buy? To, I have a problem, would you come over and fix it? Which I could answer neither of those questions. But what I didn't want was to be labeled the computer guy. I need to explain what I did to people for a living. And this didn't extend just to my coworkers. It's getting in the habit of getting an explanation for everybody. When I first started in my career, I was an urban planner, and my grandmother went around telling everybody I planted trees. And then you're trying to explain how you use technology to do urban planning, and that really confuses it. So the habit everybody gets into is, what do you do for a living? I do this thing with an organized collection of hardware, software. I'm the computer guy. I do GIS. What's that? I do mapping. And you get in a really bad habit of trying to not get the communication off of what people do. So what's wrong with that? There's no buy-in from anybody. There's a thing that, oh, I've got people for that. And when we started to look at this is to try to figure out how to give a different explanation to different people to get them involved. Have you ever gone to a party? And I see a couple of you, but I know what your answer is. But you go and you talk to people. What do you ask them about? Their grandkids? What's your sign? Right? Well, what do people like to talk about? What do you do for a living? And you've talked to what'd you say, a boring engineer?
Yeah.
They'll tell you all kinds of things that you don't want to know. But when you go in and you get in the habit of starting that thing about doing just computer mapping, it doesn't go anywhere. So I got in the habit of always going through and correcting people in a polite way of what this thing was, so that it always seeded people's ideas. Go ahead. So go ahead through the whole thing. We're back one slide, I think. We're missing one slide.
Yeah.
It's the one that says define.
Okay.
I'll just go with this. So what is a GIS? GIS is just a really way of thinking. So how many of you are old enough, and raise your hands, to remember when people used to talk about IT, IS, data processing, right? How many went to college and every time you went in, you had to give them your social security number or your unique ID every time? Well, that's an information system. They've come up with a unique way of finding you. You could say it would be my name and I'd find you that way, but my name is Chris Thomas, and as unique as I like to think I am, there's 240,000 Chris Thomases in the United States alone. Not very unique. But what is unique to me? Where I lived, where I went to school, where I work, it's all a location. And so I like to tell people, you carry around a GIS database all the time in your pocket. How many have a driver's license? So if you stop and think about it, your driver's license has a lot of geography on it. So if I use the driver's license as an example, you have this situation where it's the first line is the driver's license number. That's a good IT designation. That is fairly unique to me, but it doesn't tell me a lot. What's the second thing? The name, your name. What's the third line? My address. First geography. What's the second one? The city I live in. What's the third one? The state I live in. What's the fourth one? It's the zip code. Those are all geographic tags that I can use and leverage in different ways. What's the first 3 digits of a phone number? Used to be. An area code. So our view of the world is everything can be organized geographically. Everything. And the idea is to start getting in a habit of beginning to think geographically and begin to change the way you think and reverse the way you think through your process. So go ahead. So the idea is to begin to connect these things, that GIS is hardware, it's software, it's data and people, but it's really about a way of thinking. How many of you have thought about your GIS, your driver's license of being a GIS database that would be useful for something? No, it's this piece of plastic that you're carrying around. But the analysis that you can do on a driver's license alone, I can do migration patterns. If somebody applies for a driver's license here and applies for a driver's license in another state, I can now begin to do migration patterns. Where are people moving? On something as simple as a driver's license. Go ahead, Richard. So I'm going to share with you a little story. And this is one of the stories that I use to try to illustrate that you have all kinds of GIS databases in your organizations. So the problem that happens is everybody thinks that I'm going to buy a GIS system, it's going to come up with all this data I'm going to be able to use immediately, and I'm just going to start working. But you've got to begin to train people to a way of logic, a way of thinking about things. So one of the cities I worked for was the city of Ontario, California, and we were in times much like today. We were broke. We were looking for new revenues. It doesn't seem like it changes from year to year. So I was in part of the IT department, and we were part of administrative services, which was IS, budget, finance, computers, purchasing, printing, the whole works. And we're in a staff meeting, and we're working with the director of finance. He says, we really need to figure out a way to generate revenue for the city. And then the staff meeting, he turns to the finance and the business license team and says, why don't you use these GIS people? I'm sure they're good for something. Wow, that was a lot. So I went down and I worked with Dennis, and Dennis was very forward-thinking in his use of technology. So Dennis thought, like a lot of people, that what we would do is we'd do a map. And what his thought was we would do a map of where businesses were, then he'd send out field staff, and he would canvass the entire city only where he knew businesses were. And he would technically reduce the number of drive time and the amount of man hours out in the field. So I says to Dennis, that's really neat, but what if we did a GIS analysis and never did a map? He said, well, I'm game. I says, well, pull up your GIS database. He said, what are you talking about? I don't have a GIS database. I said, you got a business license file, don't you? He said, sure. I said, pull it up. He pulls it up. What's the first thing up there? Business license number, driver's license number. What's the next line? The name of the business, your name on your driver's license. What's the third line? Where the address is of the business. So he had a GIS database. He never thought about looking at what he had. So what I said is we're going to take this database of businesses you have, because these are known entities that have a business license. And we're going to take the business license file in the business department, and we're going to compare that to the planning department's file of land use. What does the planning department use? They have a parcel number. What's the second they have? A location. It doesn't matter what it is. We just matched the two together and did a balance of there's something there, but there's no license on it, and we sent out a letter. Go ahead. And by doing this simple query on a test area, we generated $156,000 in escaped revenue in 16 man-hours and never left the building. We never produced a map, the thing that everybody expects to see first. Well, we presented this at a staff meeting, and somebody decided to be smart aleck and say, well, you idiots, you probably are sending notices to vacant buildings. There's a building there, but it's vacant. We said, you know what, that's a good idea, but this was just a test. So what do? We took the planning department file, we took the business license file, and we compared it to the water meter file that said it's on or off and there's water going to it or not going to it. We took 3 databases that had a geographic reference in it and cross-referenced that from the geography. Not the license number, not the name of the business, not the name of the billing person, on the different geographies. And lo and behold, in that analysis, by doing that, we generated $256,000 in escaped revenue. So what's my definition of a GIS to the finance person? Would I explain to him that this is a system of geographically referenced information on hardware? No, it was a financial auditing system. My definition to that individual, that GIS is a revenue generating tool. It's an efficiency tool. It's a productivity tool. How many of you have ever gone to your organization and said, GIS is a productivity tool? How many of you have ever walked up to an executive and said, this is an economic development tool? Richard said that we go to a lot of these different events and we get a lot of city managers and county executives and mayors come up to us. And typically what would happen is they'd come for the free t-shirt. And we'd hear this, well, yeah, I know you Esri people. You're kind of like ArcView, aren't you? And they'd say, oh, yeah. They said, yeah, all I know is every time I ask for my staff for a map, they produce one for me. Great stuff. I'm like, oh, this is just bothering me. So this other city manager came up. He says, oh, Esri, I love you guys. You know that we just did an audit on our trash truck collections, and we were able to reduce the number of trucks from 39 drivers to 25 drivers and never lay off a single person? We've generated $350,000 in escaped revenue and been able to do a saving over $1 million gallons of gas a year. He got it. Somebody did a job of educating him on what this was. The other city managers waited for him to leave and says, what is he talking about? And what I'm saying here is in this whole thing is it's about the way that you set up the program. It's about the way that you set up the people's expectations of what this stuff is. And to begin to think that everybody works with some form of geography, whether you're a salesperson, when you're citing retail locations, whether you're trying to figure out the best way for students to walk to school, there's a geographic component to it. And it's about starting there. Go ahead, Richard. So we want, in our ideas, is to redefine your view in this presentation about what GIS is. I'll speak to this in a second, but how many of you work in organizations where you had 900 dialogues on whether or not you should do Facebook, Twitter, and all these other things? We were kind of in a panic, like, what do we do with this thing? Well, think about something. How many of you have an iPhone or a Droid and the first thing it says, may I use your current location? Well, think about that for a minute. When you tweet, you're tweeting from somewhere. You're physically somewhere. So what that says is everything becomes a data type based on its location. Everything is fair game. A few years ago, I would have talked about how you could videotape a sewer line from point A to point B. And you could know where that water main break was. But in today's times, we've got to think further and further outside the box of what we can do and where spatial data comes from. How many of you have ever gone into a store where they've asked for well, now it's your email, but your phone number starting with the area code? What was that person doing? They were collecting information about you. Where you lived. Did you live in one place and shop in another? How many of you have seen those Verizon television commercials where the guy's going, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? What is that guy doing? He's collecting the location of coverage. They're pulling that back into a GIS system and analyzing whether or not they have coverage in your area or not. It's all geography. So my point on this is that when you go and do a definition of what a GIS is, based on who you're talking to, an executive, an engineer, a planning person, how would you define GIS in a simple way? The simplest way might be to say it's a tool to enhance workflows and productivity. It's a way of building an information base. It's a way of supporting decisions. How many of you ever thought to explain that that's what you do? That you're one of the most important components, and this is one of the most important tools an organization can have. I wasn't at the business summit, but I heard how a guy from the Gap was doing a presentation, the Gap stores, and how when their budgets cut, they cut GIS. And he said it was one of the biggest mistakes they had because they couldn't figure out why they were citing new businesses in bad locations. They took out the best tool during budget cuts that were helping them make the most informed decisions. The best thing to do was put it back in place. And so you begin to think these things through. And so we have this idea of how do you explain how we're different than any of that other mapping stuff that's out there. The ones that just put a dot on a map. Anybody could put a dot on a map. I could just use, in the old days I'd say we could have used CorelDRAW or Harvard Graphics or something like that and done a map. That's not what this is. This is a very sophisticated system. And the way to think about it is that we do these 5 patterns. What I mean by that, if somebody said, hey, I want to improve efficiencies and go with green technologies for my organization, well, what's the first thing you'd have to do? Well, where are the buildings? Where are existing solar panels? Where are existing wind turbines. So we call that asset management or data inventory. So you have to start by some method of collecting information. It doesn't just appear. So GIS technology creates data. It comes from somewhere. What's the next thing? Well, if I have the data, now I want to analyze the building rooftops, I want to look at tree canopies, I want to figure out where's the best place to put solar panels. So what does GIS do? It analyzes the data that you have. What's the next thing? I can put data out in the field. I can give you driving directions. I can collect information, send it back to other systems. What's the next thing? Operational awareness, executive dashboard. I can take a look at what's going on real time. And what's the fourth pattern? You could call it civic engagement. You can call it consumer engagement. But it's the ability now for people to get involved who aren't part of the system. And in a GIS, it's a system that allows you to do all 5 things. Those other things that are simple mapping tools don't do all 5 activities. And this is a way to explain to people that it's not about just putting dots on maps. It's a way of thinking. Go ahead, Richard. So over the years, what has happened is we've gone through this process of trying to understand maps and what a GIS person would do. And it's usually a disconnect between somebody who's an engineer, a planner, a solid waste guy, whatever your discipline is, of not knowing what to ask for. So what we noticed over the years is that most GIS started with data creation. So people just created data, and that's all they did. Well, a few years later, someone says, can you make me a map? And people started doing maps. You know what was really frustrating as a GIS person? Is when you printed out a map, only to see some guy in the graphics department drawing on the map you printed, doing analysis. What was next? It was the ability to do analysis next. To ask a question. I'd like to know what the population is along this railroad track because there's a high octane pipeline next to it. And I want to know what populations would be damaged if a train derailed. So people were actually moving forward. And where it really began to take off was this idea of operational efficiency. On the left was all these other things, these other buzzwords that came into place. Internet, data fusion centers, mobile. Well, Jack, in his planner yesterday, says, we are a company that continues to adapt. That's why we stay focused. The way I would make this analogy is this kind of looking at, I know this is, well, it's not U.S. Central, but it's like Walmart or Home Depot or some of your favorite stores. The stores that went out of business and were taken over by the internet were people that didn't see the big picture of how things connected, right? Somebody like a Walmart has a storefront and they have an internet operation, right? So what you're doing here is you're taking a look at all these other activities. So when I pose the question, what do we do with social media? Is that a separate thing? Do I connect to it? Well, yeah, I do both of those. I can have a map in a social media. How many of you have a Facebook page and you scroll over and it says map? What are the questions it puts on your Facebook profile? Where did you go to high school? I mean, think about it. Did you ever, at my house, they think I'm a little weird, right? Because I see geography in everything I do. I go to the movies and I'm watching, I think it was Annette Bening, it was the American President, it was the love story, and they're about ready to kiss, and I look back and I scream out in the theater, look, there's GIS in the background. It's seeing geography everywhere you go. And I'll tell you, compared to Richard's background, I wasn't a geography major. I never got that. And now we have these things called mashups and apps and transparency and mobile and crowdsourcing. Well, what we're beginning to see is all these worlds are coming together in brand new applications that if I was presenting to you 4 or 5 years ago, I wouldn't even be speaking about. Because the opportunity to think spatially continues to expand every time something comes out. It's a way of taking new ideas and bringing them back in and say, what can I do with this? So I got this basic idea now what GIS is. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of preparing your organization. It's a way of looking at what's in your organization to start with. But what happens is a lot of people talk about doing a pilot project. We're going to start small, and then we'll grow this thing. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Is that what management usually says? So what happens is they pick a department as a prototype, and we work on their project. And what do we do when we work on their project? We work with data that was important to them. Well, how does that help the rest of the organization? If I'm doing water lines and I put in water lines as my first data layer that I put in, who else is going to benefit from that? There might be a few people. But the best way to prepare an organization is to ask the question, what will you do with this? It's a democracy, people. It's simply getting people in a room saying, how many of you could use streets? How many of you could use parcels? So if all the hands went up, they said it needed streets, and you got up to zoning and only 4 people raised their hand, what do you start with? You start with the streets. The other layers come. Because if you start with a foundation of data sets that everybody can use, you can begin to lay on top of that. You can begin to expand all these different application areas because you begin to give people a foundation from which to work from. Go ahead, Rich. But if you saw this, are you going to do the demo now or later?
Later.
Okay. So the idea is that in this whole scheme of things, that everything is fair game in a GIS. And you've got to begin to understand that everybody has a different definition of data. I use the simple words. I used to say database and information base. And this guy looked at me and says, you're confusing me. Is an information base the same as a database? Well, think about things. Different disciplines have different definitions of things. Go ahead, Rich. So let me show you just a quick video of another way of thinking. This is a simple video, and what this is a GPS in a car on your phone, and as it's going, it's collecting information about where you are. And what does it do? It's sending you coupons, things you might want to stop by and do. How is it doing that? It's finding where your geographic location is, and it takes your demographics of what you have, and it sends you notices. Well, how is this applicable? It's for buy local applications, it's for retailers. And this is about a real-time information being pulled into a program and feeding back on a cell phone based on that whole thing I said. Can I use your current location? Think about when you type in Fandango to go get movie tickets. What is the first thing it asks you? Where are you? And so when you start to think about the applications that will come out of it, you have to begin to think, what's going on in my organization? Go ahead. Another example is community polling. So I send out a survey. So it could be a corporate survey, it could be a government survey, but what are people thinking? Well, here's another question, is what are people thinking, but where are they? Is there the same demographic makeup in each location? Is this a unique? Is there hot spotting where some people are polling and the rest of the city is not responding? Why is that? And now it's just taking the polls as just one more data type and geolocating that opinion. How many of you ever done a survey and looked at the answers but never really understood where the people lived and where they worked in comparison to what the questions were being asked? And so this takes things like surveys to a completely different level. Go ahead, Rich. So building a GIS is like building a pyramid. Everybody thinks you're going to start by making maps the next day. But the reality is you've got to set up the organization on asking them what they do for a living. Remember my party example? There was a guy that I met with one time, and he said, in the early days of buying technology, people say, hey, I need a computer. Well, what would you do with it? Oh, there's lots of things. And I go, okay. But GIS is a little different. Well, if I bought a GIS, what would I do with it? Oh, lots of things. Oh, all right. It doesn't work that way, right? So you got to begin to ask people what they do. And so that party analogy I gave to you is how to get people involved with GIS is not to try to figure out something unique to do with GIS. It's how to begin solving the stuff that they're already working on. If you went up to a solid waste guy and said, what do I do? He says, well, I pick up the trash. Well, how do you do that? Well, we spend the first part of our year figuring out where all the streets are and how many customers we have. Then we divide them between commercial and residential. Then we divide it between recycling, green, and I need to know where those are. And there's a different truck for each one. Well, isn't that a geographic problem right off the bat? You might have thought his job was to pick up solid waste, but his job was really to efficiently keep the community clean, to get the things out. Go ahead, Rich. So when you go through and you begin to ask people, remember my story about Dennis? He had a business license file, but what you begin to learn is everybody has different definitions of things. So if I went into the planning department and I said, can you show me all the hotel motels? What is that to an urban planner? To To an urban planner, that's transient housing. To the Census Bureau, that's transient housing. If I went over to the Economic Development Department, what is a hotel motel? It's a commercial. It's a sales tax revenue. They don't think of it as transient housing. So what you begin is to find is that everybody has different definitions, but sometimes they're talking about the same geography. So a personal example, I went back one more. I went into the business license department, and the guy says, I never have anything he can use. I says, well, what do you mean you don't have anything to use? He goes, well, I look at your data list. So people always says, what do you got? What do I have? What do you need? What do you got? And the idea was that we'd give people a list of data, and they think that that was their starting point. It's always going back and asking the people what they do for a living. So what they did is, I said, well, what's that map on the wall? He says, well, that's our moratorium area for dust control. We're not allowing any building right now because there's a lot of dust and we're getting a lot of complaints. So we're not allowing a building there. So can I borrow that map? He said, sure. It looked very familiar to me. I ran downstairs and I put it on, and I compared that map to 3 other departments. And down to the geography, the planning department called the exact same geography the soil erosion zone. In the police department, they called the exact same data type, the area, the high wind district for the police helicopter unit. Whereas there were 3 definitions of the same data set. But had I given somebody and not taken the time to understand what they do, there would be a perception I have nothing of value for them. Does that make sense? So it's about getting to know people. It's a getting to know their disciplines that you're trying to support. Go ahead, Rich. So the idea is once you get a handle on what data is, you now have an ability to reuse data and get the information and have applications built across the organization. Remember that inventory I did on business license to generate that $256,000 in escaped revenue? You know what the derivative of that database was? I now had a listing of vacant buildings that I could turn over to the Economic Development Department to begin marketing those businesses. Nobody thought about that when we started the project. It's what do you do with the derivatives, the data, and the output of the things that you do? What's its other use? A burn district and a fire. So we looked at the burn area and a fire, and we see where the fire was on a map. To a fireman, that's where the fire was. What's that later? It's where the mudslide and the floods are going to be. The data just changes, and you are able to use it from one point to another. Go ahead, Rich. So when we go through this process, we try to say this term enterprise GIS. You hear that a lot. What does that mean? It simply means organization-wide. That's all it means. But when you look at how GIS will fit a problem, how do you look at that? Well, it's data creation, it's mapping, reporting. I always ask people, do you have an enterprise GIS? And they go, oh, I do. Oh, so do you use GIS for routing your vehicles? No. Do you have people out in the field with mobile devices collecting information and send it back? Well, no. Well, do you have data centers where people can go in and pull? No. Well, what's your enterprise? Well, that means I do all the mapping for the other people. They don't have a full picture of everything it can do. And we find that a lot when management doesn't know how to ask the questions and vice versa. Our biggest problem that Richard and I get at trade shows, executives walk up to us and say, how do I get my GIS people to tell me what the heck is going on without all kinds of details? There is interest, right? And then on the flip side, we have GIS people say, how do you help me get management support? They're not talking to each other in the same language that they understand. Productivity, efficiency, mapping, spatial. Go ahead, Richard. So that idea of going through the inventory database and what people need, hey, we all need streets, start there. By having the streets in a city, as an example, I can do property notification, I can do a general plan, I could do the business license audit, I can do all kinds of different things with it, but it's all from one foundation. And different things have different rates of return. And to get your return on your GIS investment is to be able to build data sets and get the mindset up where people begin to use it simultaneously. That's when you see the real value come back to you. Go ahead. So this is just to really illustrate that don't go out there and build data first. Go out and inventory what's going on in your organization. A story you like to tell sometimes, the city I was working with, the woman called up and says, Chris, my city manager said if I don't come up with something soon, they're going to cut the whole program. I said, well, what did you tell them? Well, we told them we'd do mapping and we could do all this and this. I said, so you told them we could do lots of things, didn't you? I said, what are you doing in your organization? She says, right now we're doing community development block grants and census information. We're trying to figure out where the low and moderate income neighborhoods are. I says, that's easy. All we need is streets and demographics. We laid it all out for her. She came out. I helped her do some maps. She took it back and laid it out on her boss's desk and says, we've found an ability to help you find the low and moderate neighborhoods that were eligible for funding. He looked and says, finally, you've given me something I can use. Before, she was just waiting for somebody to tell her what to do. She didn't go out and seek the organization, what was going on, so she could help. So the idea on this slide is that you don't start with the output. Remember, Dennis, my friend, thought the first thing he would do was a map. That he just went right to the output. What you want to do is go back up and you say, what is going on in my organization? Permitting, subdivisions, redistricting, set up sales stories. It doesn't matter. As a result, I'm going to do an inspection. I'm going to figure out what my routes are. The things that GIS does. You don't start with the output. You start with what the beginning is or what the problem is or what the activity you're trying to solve is. Go ahead, Rich. And it's to take that enterprise approach, that diagram, as to what you're trying to accomplish. And is there opportunity for GIS to help you in that process? We get all these people say, oh, well, I'm going to put a CRM, a customer relationship management, an ERP, enterprise resource planning tool in. I said, oh, that's great. Oh, that's going to be helpful because we're going to have the GIS and you'll be able to see a dot on a map of where the requests are coming in. Well, that's a little far short-sighted, right? Based on everything I just told you. It could help you create the work orders and generate the workload based on the different reps you have out in an area and geographically balance them. It could help generate the time schedules of how you make time windows so you can optimize your efficiency a day. It can actually optimize the drive time so you reduce fuel costs, get enough done and do more with less in a shorter amount of period of time. But if you started with the top that I'm going to have a dot on a map, that's all you're going to get. It's looking at the whole process and the whole chain what GIS can solve. How are we doing time?
25 minutes.
Okay. So let me go through some quick examples. Data is deceiving. I want you all to picture in your head that you've been part of a park planning commission, and they've brought a bunch of citizens in and said, we'd like you to help us plan some parks. And we'd like to have some parks that would allow us to have some temporary soccer fields, some basketball courts, and some hiking trails. They hand you a paper map. And you sit with a bunch of other citizens, you say, okay, I've got my parcel in mind. How many of you, don't raise your hands, see some parcels that might be useful, where you could start? And these are the city-owned parcels that we can just, we could get going because we don't have to buy anything. Well, GIS has a third dimension. Go ahead, Rich. What if I said this was the same data? Is your decision the same? So what GIS does is it begins to allow you to focus in and see things in the real-world context. Go ahead, Rich. The other part of that we have, and we won't belabor this, but is that GIS is a complementary to other systems. When you go out in an organization to see a permitting system, to see a routing system, to see a logistics system, GIS is just part of those things. And so now when you look, a lot of times what we get is people say, well, but does it work with the GIS? And the answer is yes, as long as you understand the workflows. So I'm going to go through some really, really, really quick examples of GIS in everyday life. So when you go out and you report a pothole, that's GIS. When you see a crime and you want to put it on a report like crime reports, that's GIS. When you want to look at these portals and transparency things like school evaluations and where government is spending, that's all GIS. You buy that Nike bracelet that you wear on your bracelet and you run around the city and then you come back and it records how you did and your calories burned and all that stuff, that's GIS. When Starbucks goes and knows exactly where to put the coffee location, the types of things to store, and what types of things you buy, that's GIS. When you see the maps on the news about the blue state, red state, who's polling location, what's happening, that's GIS. When you want to know about home deliveries, when Sears, you call up Sears and says, I'd like my delivery, and they have to give you a 4-hour window, that's GIS. When they get that package to you overnight, that's GIS. When you look at land use planning, public information, tax assessment, that's GIS. When you're really irritated because your kids are not going to the school you want them to go to because they did the boundaries, that's GIS. When they figure out where the bus routes are and what's the best place to pick up kids as, that's GIS. When you want to look at economic development and know where the best place to site a new business based on demographics, or I like to buy a new home and I like to know the ratio of males to females and what my opportunities are, that's GIS. When you want to find an ATM machine at night and on your iPhone, that's GIS. When you want to understand our depletion of our natural resource and what's going on, if you want to look at plume modeling and what goes on, that's GIS. When you want to understand geofencing and natural defense and where the best place to optimize homeland security and understand border crossings and what the impacts are, that's GIS. When you understand crime patterns and what's happening, do you want to know where the best place so that you could or could not put a liquor license? That's GIS. When you understand health outbreaks and what populations are going to be impacted, that's GIS. When you want to do emergency management and when you have a big, tough problem, this is the Columbia Space Shuttle. And when it was entering into the atmosphere, remember how every time you see a plane crash, they go back through, and that plane crash, they pick up every piece of that plane? Well, think about a space shuttle coming in at a great speed. What they were actually able to do is find every part of that space shuttle, and it was across multiple states, across multiple counties, by looking at the trajectory that it was coming in, anticipating some models and analysis to figure out where all those debris and pieces would be. So they could reassemble to understand. That's GIS. Go ahead, two more. It's inside buildings, understanding now that I can walk through a building and I can understand where the fire apparatuses are. I'm walking in the mall and I'm getting coupons on deals as I'm walking in the mall. That's GIS. It's used for transportation routing and every airplane is mapped. Where it is, where it was supposed to be, where it landed. Did it go where it wasn't supposed to be? That's GIS. It's using for solar energy and renewable energy. That's GIS. One of the first users of GIS were Indian nations. They've been using it to do archaeology, to give entitlements, to look at their natural resources for decades. Good. It's used for utilities, so every time you make a phone call or you have a problem with your sewer or water, GIS is part of that. And I'll leave it with this last one and turn it over to Richard. We actually helped land the Mars rover. We've mapped the solar system. And we knew exactly the best place to put the Mars rover based on the map of Mars. So when the JPL wanted to put that rover in the right location, that was GIS. And so I'll turn this over to Richard. But the point of it is that each and every day there's an opportunity for GIS to expand what you can do with it. You may just not have thought about it the same way that we do, because I've been doing this for 26 years. With that, I'll turn it over to Richard.
So I'm just going to steal some points off of this one slide of Chris. The far right side is the human brain. You get the idea you can map an Earth and a Mars and okay, I can make a map of that, I get that. But people are using it inside of buildings. They're using it inside the human body. As long as you have a reference system, could be the inside of a car, could be, as long as you create that ground truth, you're able to map it. And that's one of the reasons why facility management has been growing so much. Where's my air conditioning? I've got a phone that there's a lot of international calls. Oh, there's nobody working on that floor. Why are those calls occurring? This floor is 78 degrees and this floor is 65 degrees. What are my rents? Are there enough people on those floors? So it's all about the decision and what you're getting out of the decision. And you can't put those pieces of information together until you have some kind of index, some kind of frame of reference to work from. So I'm going to segue here and talk about some trends very shortly. Where it's going, where we've been, where it's going, but then get into some resources that, as new users, as new attendees to this conference, you probably have seen in the fire hose of data that we throw at you. But just familiarize you with them and go from that, and then we'll open it up for some discussions, questions, and some free forms. You might have seen Roger Tomlinson mentioned on this big stage yesterday. Started thinking about GIS as a term literally in the 1960s. And that was all natural resource, big, large space problems. Where are my trees? Where's my timber industry? How much tax can I get out of that timber? Where do I want companies to work? Where's my employment? Huge, broad problems. And then we got into the extractive industries, the petroleum, the coals. I've got the environmentalists. I've got the coal extraction. I've got timber companies. I've got people who wanted to save the spotted owl. Both sides had GIS. Both sides came to solutions because they were able to talk about a common language. Well, timber guy, you want trees. There's trees over here, but the spotted owls are over here. What can we trade? And rather than come to the impasse of, I got to save my owls, I got to cut my trees, they came to the working understanding of the data. Transportation, communication, retail banking, law enforcement, these are things you see downstairs, and we've had them at our conference for years. Health, of course, public safety in 9/11 just blossomed the use of spatial understanding in crime and homeland security, and just in those aspects of life. And today we're seeing a growth in human resources. Where are my citizens that need services? Where are my services? Are they properly balanced? Are my service centers for where my population was 20 years ago? Well, that whole new population has come in, and they don't live in that area anymore. They've moved. So why am I making them come? Travel across the city or the county to get to the services that they needed? Administration, tax. We've always dabbled, GIS folks have always dabbled in tax, property tax usually. But now you're seeing more and more chief financial officers looking at their exposure. Where are my stores? Hurricanes coming up through Florida. Do I have stores in Florida? Where are they relative to the storm events? Okay, the insurance industry is requiring cities and states and governments to issue, I want a map on where your stores are. I just don't want a list. You're telling me that this park was flooded out and you need new park benches. Show me a map, and then I'll start issuing checks. Good. You saw this before, and I just want to reiterate, it's the integration of the data. Geography is the common index, and there is no other index out there that allows you to relate those databases and ask where and near to a database. Is my store, is my franchise near the population that likes to eat ice cream? Is it near the suppliers of paper cups and napkins? How do I make sure my resources are in line? Good. We've skimmed around this word of a platform. And that's what it is. It has 5 patterns. Okay? You have to start thinking that you're a base that all of these different work elements can reside on. Okay? And exist. And more importantly, coexist the data so that that planner knows that the wind zone, their wind zone, is also the erosion zone. It's also the place where I don't want to fly my helicopter. And it's that commonality, that platform that allows you to start making enterprise decisions of your data. Importantly, we have a back office. We have our traditional GIS. We've got our servers. We've got our professionals. We have cloud technology. And on the front, we have our user experience. Whether that's an internal user on a desk, trying to make decisions, enter data, or the citizen. I've got a phone and I want to know what's going on in my government. Why is this street closed? There's a parade today. How do I get around it? Okay. These all exist as a platform. Good. And platforms don't recognize the boundaries between technologies. That server technology has to be able to deliver to that user experience. Whether it's an iPhone, a desktop, it has to be able to programmed in the right programming language. It has to be able to do its heavy lifting back in a serious scientific platform, but then deliver the information up front in an understandable and intuitive format. Okay. So web-based government is emerging. Web-based business is emerging. Okay, how do I integrate this data? How do I make the right, how do I deputize my people in the field to make the right decision? To be able to bring in data sets from the government. If I own a franchise, where are the possible locations I can site my franchise? Where's the population I want to see? I can get that from the U.S. Census Bureau. Where's my business data? Here's my demographics of people that shop. And bringing them all together as a system, as a fluid system, using cloud technology, using back-end technology, and delivering it to the right device. So why is it important to me? That's the question we want to stimulate out of you guys today. To go back and, as Chris said, to be able to articulate to your mother so that she gets it, so that she can tell her friends and they get it. Okay? That succinctness is what helps successful GIS implementations. It's not that you make maps, but then everybody comes and wants you to make the map for the parade. That's fine, but it's more important to give them the tools so that they can make the map of their parade. You are worried about the data, the system, the collection of that, so that same map of the parade can also be used as a police staging map, so that that can be given to the press, so that the mayor has it in his pocket, so he understands when a neighbor calls and complains that why'd you close my street? So it's that integration of all the points in the star. Who here has heard about the story maps? Has gone to the website? Only a handful. Please go to this site, storymaps.esri.online.com.home. And it's a series of templates that allow you to pour your data in and come up with an app. They're very easy to use. You saw a lot of them yesterday on the main stage. They allow you to set this is just a handful of hundreds of maps that have been developed, different formats, different delivery methods, different display methods that are all available to you to be able to pour in a spreadsheet of data. Here's the top 10 art attractions to my community. I've got them on a spreadsheet. I've got an address. I've got a picture. I've got a website if somebody cares. And you're able to make one of these story maps and present it in a matter of minutes. So resource number one, story maps. As homework, I want everybody to go in and look at it, see if you can make one. Good. The other is resources.esri.com. And in here are templates and communities and galleries of data that are all meant to help. This particular community, this is our front page to our industries, and you can see that there is a community just for about every topic, every industry heading that we have. And underneath those communities, go ahead, we have galleries of applications. ArcGIS for local government, ArcGIS for public works, ArcGIS for business. And they have tips and code and examples and map galleries and map story templates that are all meant to assist in helping you tell your story about your data, about your business process, to present it to a larger audience than yourself. A number of mapping platform for your organizations where we have mobile code, getting started quickly videos, all set toward either business processes or industries or little technical vignettes of one or two of our software offerings. Powerful out-of-the-box apps, the templates that I was referring to, being able to take code that is being shared both by Esri and by our users. A wonderful place to contribute. If you have a neat app, contribute. This is the place to put it up there. You have an app that does, okay, wild animal tracking. Guess what? That code was taken by the police department in a Washington State police agency, and they were able to do crime mapping, tracking of criminals, predators. Okay, animal predators, human predators. And they were able to take that code and jumpstart what they needed to do. Good. These are some of the galleries that are out there. We have galleries for both maps, web apps, and mobile apps, all categorized under various industries.
So just point of clarification. So if I'm looking for census information, there's data there. You can just download it. If you want some streets to get going, we put some streets up there. In talking to different organizations over the years where they all said that they wanted the same things, yeah, we'd really like a customer service application. I'd like a park finder. You know what we said is, we're just going to build that and give it to you. Move on to the tough things, right? So your point is, all the things that people would have, we've given you an app gallery where we just give you the applications free of charge, and you can just use them. That's what this is.
Half the content is also shared by our users, as I was mentioning. So it's not just our stuff. It's user stuff. I mean, we can only be so creative. You guys can be really creative. Resources on content for developers. How do I know if it's a desktop app or a mobile app? What platform do I need? We have communities, internal and external, where you can start sharing and asking questions. Okay, this is our version of Facebook for the developers. Okay, I've got a problem to do this. Has any place to ask question? Has anybody approached this problem this way before? Place to research, place to do searches on similar problems that you're facing in the developer world. So there's a very robust developer community out there, as well as our developer conference in the spring. Okay, so if that's what you need to get out of this week, speak to them, find them this week here today. If you really want to talk to the folks who code, come in March. So these are some of the groupings that we put some of our shareable code. Whether it's geocoding and place search, a common thing that's asked for. As Chris mentioned, you start up an app on your iPhone, you start up a game on iPhone and it asks you where you are. 98% of all the apps on the Apple Store have a location component. Okay? If it's nothing else, just for their own marketing reasons, they want to know where you're using that app. Are you bored in an airport? Are you waiting on a train? Are you traveling in a car? Are you in a grocery store? And what demographics are you? So they know that maybe they need to put ads in the airport about using their app. Okay, so that's where you're using it. Other group of development tools, directions and routings. Sure, you can go to Bing and you can say, I live here and I need to go to the movie theaters. But what about when you're moving? What about when you need an enterprise application to say, I've got 5 delivery trucks and they need to start here and 4 of them need to go there, 3 of them up here. These are the tools to go find, how do I start routing? A little more complex than one person, one route, one solution.
If you'll be managing a system and your staff tells you this is going to take them months and months of program to do, you go, aha, but I know a resource where you can take it and do it faster. That's the value. You're just knowing where things are to get things going.
We have tools for mapping and visualization. How do I bring in weather data and put it on orthophotography? How do I bring in weather data and display my delivery trucks? Okay. If I'm a public utility, where are the thunder showers as they move? I want my trucks right behind that front and moving along that front with them. Very simple tools that are collected here that allow you to get up and running very, very shortly. Store and query, geographic features. How do I start collecting where my customers are? They're using Flickr. They're using tweets. Where are they? Are they moving? Okay, are they even in my service area? Tools like this to evaluate your correspondence to your elected officials' office. Yeah, I get this nasty letter about this topic, but that person's not even in my district. So they go in the B list. Or that person is in my district, and they're tweeting a lot. I need to address this. Again. And then there's open source. It's kind of heady, but I like to say we do open source better than open source. We're a very active participant in GitHub. Anybody, before they walked in the room, knew what the word GitHub was? Okay, so very robust open source libraries where developers can start using our APIs, develop tools. They don't even need Esri software, but they work against ArcGIS platform and ArcGIS Online so that their app can work against a county's data. They could create the Find the Bus app for themselves as a business. They don't have to wait for the county to do it. So we have a lot of activity in that sense of this is open. This is what we mean by a platform. The government, the enterprise, the corporation is building that platform of data. Now you have the ability to interact at a number of levels. And one more.
You're at 2 minutes.
Okay, we have developer runtimes, SDKs for smartphones and tablets. Very robust practice. Go ahead. And our educational resources. We've got tons of books. Esri Press. Anybody not know about Esri Press? We put out quite a few, a dozen or more academic-oriented books, technical-oriented books, and general mapping and cartography books every single year. Okay, great resource. The GIS tutorials, 1, 2, and there's actually a third. There are great places to get your fingers wet. Every couple of years, I go through those workbooks myself, just to make sure I'm up to speed on the software. My wife accuses me of enjoying it too much. Because I'll dedicate a whole weekend and I'll just do these books, and it really makes me excited again because I'm actually getting to do it. I don't get to do it as often as I want. And they're great educational sources and inspiration for ideas on what to do next. We have newsletters. The two on the side are the state and local, and then the federal newsletter comes out quarterly. And then these are just some of the other industry newsletters that we have available, whether it's water resources, forestry, petroleum, business, location services, homeland security. The list goes on. So find your niche. We can help you downstairs on the exhibit floor because we have the government islands, okay, where all the government and then all the private sector, all of the industries have a location on that floor. Come meet us. Find out what user groups are going on. Find out where we have content on the web that might serve your industry that you're interested in. And with that, thank you for your attention. The one piece of business, please fill out the form. Tell us what you liked, and especially tell us what you didn't like. What didn't we cover? And we're open for questions.
If you liked us, didn't like us, I'm Jack Dangerman. That's Scott Morehouse. If you liked us, that's Richard. This is Chris. We hope that with one thing, you left with one thing you take away with you today that you could reuse. And thank you for your attention.
Do we have an ID number?